Hello, this is Abby from OllieHolly.com. Over the past few weeks, I have been experimenting with different methods for making stripes for amigurumi. When making amigurumi, you will likely be working in spiral or continuous rounds. When working in spiral, you do not join at the end of each round with a slip stitch or chain 1 to lift the first stitch of the round. This means that the final stitch and the first stitch of the same round are not of the same height level and don't match up, as you can see here. This final stitch is 1 stitch taller. So, when you change colors, you will see a very obvious step in your work, like you see here. To deal with that, a lot of very brilliant people on the internet have come up with different solutions. So it's these 3 right here. However, most of these tutorials are created with using acrylic yarn in mind. But because I mostly work with cotton yarn instead of acrylic, the joins don't actually turn out as seamless as the tutorials show. This is due to the fact that stitch definition is very clear when working with cotton yarn. This experiment all started when I had the idea to create this panda bean here. And every single method that I tried was just really not cutting it for me, especially in the back join here. In this video, I'm going to be showing you 3 of the internet's most popular stripe making methods, what I like and don't like about each of these methods, and when I would use each method. Then, at the very end, I'll show you the method I settled on to create better looking stripes when making amigurumi with cotton yarn. You'll find timestamps in the description box down below if you want to just skip to my method, but I do encourage you to watch the entire video if you're interested in learning why I chose to work my stripes this way. Here are the different methods that I will be going through in this video, and the timestamps for each of these methods will be in the description box down below. The first method is a really popular method because it's really easy to do and does not involve cutting the yarn tail. For this method, work up until the second to the last stitch. So this is our last stitch and this is our second to the last stitch. Insert the hook into the final stitch and draw up a loop. Just a note, I'm working the yarn under single crochet stitch for all the examples in this video. Then instead of yarning over and drawing it through the 2 loops with the first color, take the yarn tail from the new color and loop the new color around the hook. You can secure the tail in the back with your fingers. Pull through to change the color of the top loop. Then drop the first color, so I'm dropping this color, and pick up the new color. Then into the first stitch of the next round, I'm going to be working a slip stitch with the new color. So I'm inserting my hook into the first stitch and working a slip stitch with the new color. After that, I'm going to work the rest of the round with the new color as I normally would. So in the next stitch, I'm just going to be working a single crochet stitch with the new color. Then I'll be continuing all the way around. When you get to the end of the round, just work a regular single crochet stitch into the final stitch if you're not changing colors for the next round. If you are, you would just do what we did at the beginning of this round. Draw a loop up with your current color, then finish the stitch with the new color to change the top loop color. Then you would just slip stitch into that first stitch and start everything all over again. However, if you're going to just transition into another round of the dark pink here, you would just work a regular single crochet stitch into the final stitch. Then work a regular single crochet stitch into the slip stitch. And then continue all the way around. What I like about this method is that it does reduce the step a little bit, especially when you compare it to the regular color change. It's also really quick and easy to do, and you don't need to cut the yarn tail for this method. This is the method I would use if the join was going to be hidden underneath a sewn piece or if I'm not looking to create perfect stripes. However, what I do not like about this method is that you can still very clearly see a step. This might be less noticeable when working with acrylic yarn, but it's not as seamless looking when working with cotton yarn. The second method that I will be showing you in this video is called the circle join. The crochet artist in the video I watched stated that for this join to work, you will need to start doing the circle join from the very beginning of the project. So you'll have to join at the end of each round starting from the first round. To do the circle join, work until the final stitch of the round. Pull the hook up lightly to loosen up the loop, then remove your hook from the loop. With the yarn tail still behind, locate the first stitch of the round and insert the hook from the back of the stitch to the front, making sure that the hook is going on top of the working end of the yarn. Place the loop around the hook and pull lightly on the working end to tighten the loop slightly. Then, carefully pull the loop through the front of the first stitch of the round and out the back, like so. Take the new color and loop the yarn tail onto the hook and draw it through the loop on the hook to create a chain 1. Then, just like in the first method, I'm going to drop the working end of the first color and pick up the new color. If you want to minimize the loop from the first color, you can pull on the working end of the first color to hide it a bit better. Then, working into the first stitch, which is the same stitch that I pulled the loop through, I'm going to just pick up a regular single crochet stitch. I'm then going to continue working all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end of this round. At the end of the round, work a single crochet into the final stitch. Then repeat the steps from the beginning of the round. Loosen up the loop and remove the hook. Then locate the first stitch and insert the hook from the back to the front. If the stitch is too tight, you can insert your hook from the front to the back to loosen up the stitch a little bit. So, insert the hook from the back to the front. Wrap the loop around the hook, then pull the loop through the first stitch to set up for the next round. Now, if you wanted to continue crocheting in this dark pink, you would just chain 1 with the same color, and then continue working the rest of the round with the same color, making sure that you start from that same stitch that you pulled the loop through at the beginning. However, if you are changing colors for the next round, here's where you would drop the darker pink and pick up the lighter pink yarn. Draw the lighter pink yarn through to create the chain. Then you would just work this next round with the lighter pink. So let's go over what I like about this method first. I really like that it levels out the rounds so that the first stitch and final stitch are on the same height level, similar to when you make joined rounds. You also don't need to cut the yarn tail to work this method. Also, in the video I watched, the artist showed it working in back loops only. I tried working it in back loops only, but I didn't keep the example piece. But the results when working into the back loops only with this method is pretty much perfect. So I believe that this method is best worked if you're working in back loops only. With that said, let's talk a little bit about what I don't like about this method. When you're working into both loops of the stitch, you'll notice that the join here is very obvious and it's not exactly seamless. I also found that partially through making this piece, my hands started to cramp up because working this join involves just a little bit more force and maneuvering than other techniques. Also, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this bar here is really just so unattractive. The third method is the method that I was using before I decided to do this experiment to find something I liked a little bit more. To work this method, cut the yarn tail and fasten off to work a seamless join in the round. To do the seamless join in the round, thread the yarn tail onto a darning needle. Then locate the second stitch of the round and insert the needle through the stitch and out the back. Pull lightly. Then insert the needle through the center of the final stitch and out the back to create a false stitch. I call this the seamless join in the round, but it's also sometimes known as the invisible or seamless finish. The seamless join in the round creates a false stitch that sits on top of the first stitch of the round. So this here is the false stitch, and this is the original stitch. Doing so lifts that first stitch up slightly. Also, just a note, I'm not going to be weaving this tail in because I'm going to be sandwiching it into the final few stitches of the next round. With a slip knot of the new color on the hook, locate the false stitch. That's this one right here. Insert the hook underneath both legs of the false stitch created by the seamless join and pick up a standing single crochet. Then continue working the rest of the round. I'll meet you a couple stitches before the end of this round to demonstrate how I sandwiched the tails from the slip knot and the seamless join in the round into the final few stitches. So I've worked up until the final 4 stitches here, and I'm going to sandwich the yarn tail from the seamless join in the round and the yarn tail from the slip knot behind the final 4 stitches here. Do so by laying the 2 yarn tails behind the stitches that you're going to be working into. Then lay the working end of the yarn over the tails. So the yarn tails are under the working end and behind the final 4 stitches. So now I'm inserting my hook into the stitch itself and underneath the 2 yarn tails. Then with my working end, I'm going to draw a loop up. And sometimes you'll notice that a little bit of the yarn tails that you are trying to sandwich gets pulled through along. So just pull on the tails to pop them back out. Continue sandwiching the tails into the back of the final stitches, making sure that your hook is going underneath both tails so that it actually gets sandwiched into the single crochet stitches. If you need to change colors in the next round, you would cut the working end, fasten off, seamless join in the round, and pick up a new stitch. However, if you're not changing colors, you would just work into the first stitch as you normally would. So let's talk about what I like about this method. This method works really well when you do one round color changes, as you can see here in my cup ramen lid. The ring here looks really nice and distinct, and it's hard to tell where the join starts. However, if you work one more round after the color change, you'll see a more visible step. I actually have another example here where you can very easily pick out where the colors transition. Although it is more subtle when compared to regular color change, it's still quite noticeable. Doing this method also creates a few yarn tails inside the work. Personally, I don't mind it so much, especially when the tails are sandwiched into the final few stitches. It's also going to be inside the amigurumi piece, so it eventually just becomes a part of the stuffing. If it does bother you, you can choose to trim it so that it's completely out of the way. So I don't think that having the yarn tails inside the work is that much of a deal breaker. With that being said, this method is now something I would only do if I was creating single round color changes, just due to the fact that this step here is still quite noticeable to me. So this brings me to the final method, which is now my preferred method when creating more seamless looking stripes. This method is the result of having experimented with the other methods. After trying out the previous methods, I realized that for most of them, other than the circle join method, which is our method number 2, the final stitch of each round is always a little bit taller than the first stitch of the round. So it's really significant here with the regular color change. But even with these two here, you see that the height difference is still quite noticeable. After seeing these results, I realized that the solution is a pretty simple one, which is what I have come up with right here. Instead of only lifting up the first stitch, we're also going to be shortening the final stitch. Work until the second to the final stitch of the round. Then, in the final stitch, work a slip stitch instead of a single crochet to make that final stitch a little bit shorter. Since in the other methods, the final stitch is always just a little bit too tall. Then, cut the yarn tail, fasten off, and work a seamless join in the round. Locate the second stitch of the round and insert the needle through the front and out the back. Then insert the needle through the center of the slip stitch and out the back. And just like in method 3, I'm going to pick up my first single crochet starting from the false stitch created by the seamless join in the round. To pick up a new color, I'm starting with a slip knot of the new color on my hook. Then I'm inserting my hook into the false stitch created by the seamless join and picking up the first single crochet stitch. Then I'm just working the rest of the round as I would regularly. And just like in method 3, I like to stop a few stitches before the end of the round to sandwich in the tail from the slip knot and the tail from the seamless join into the final few stitches. So just lay the tail so that it's directly behind the stitches you are working into, and make sure that the working end is on top of the yarn tails. Sandwich your yarn tails into the back of the final few single crochet stitches. And if you're not changing colors the next round, you would just work a regular single crochet stitch into this final slip stitch here. Then work a single crochet into the standing single crochet here to start the next round. And if you're noticing that the false stitch from the seamless join is looking a little too loose, you can pull on the tail to tighten the false stitch a little bit. You can also pull on the tail from the slip knot to make the transition here a little bit tighter. I'm actually going to work the entire round so that I can show you the color change bit again in the next round. So I've worked all the way around until the second to the last stitch of the round. And because I'm changing colors in the next round, I'm going to work a slip stitch in this final stitch. Then I'm fastening off and working a seamless join in the round. So I'm inserting my needle through the second stitch and out the back. Then I'm inserting it back into the center of the slip stitch and out the back. To pick up the next color, I'm starting with a slip knot on my hook of the new color and picking up a standing single crochet in the false stitch created by the seamless join. And as you can see here, when I work that first single crochet stitch into this false stitch, I pulled the false stitch up a little too much. And if that happens to you, all you have to do is just pull on the tail from the seamless join to tighten the false stitch a little bit more. And when you get to the final few stitches of the round, just make sure to sandwich the tails from the slip knot and seamless join into the backs of the final few stitches. What I like about this method is that the stripes look more even when compared to previous methods that look pretty good. The join is still visible because you can see the bar from the seamless join, but the stripes, when compared to previous methods, are much straighter. And of course, for those of you who do not enjoy having yarn tails in the back of your work, you're likely not going to enjoy this method. But personally, I don't really mind it once I've sandwiched it into my final few stitches. And it really doesn't matter too much for amigurumi because these yarn tails are just going to be inside the work anyway. Before I end this video, I just want to mention that I also tried Club Crochet's No Cut Join color change method, where you change only the top loop color of each stitch before transitioning fully to the next color. This method creates a beautiful line in an almost seamless transition. When you look at the previous methods, you'll notice that the line here is pretty jagged. That's because the top loop of this round is still orange. In Club Crochet's method, he changes the top loop of this orange round to blue. However, I personally had a tough time working with this method. I found that having to manage 2 strands of yarn in the back of the work while also twisting it isn't something that I enjoy doing. This method took me much longer than other methods, and although it looks amazing, I'm just not sure it's the method for me. If you would like to give this method a try, you'll find the link in the description box down below. So here are all the methods I showed you in this video lined up side by side so that it's easier to compare them. I think that each method has its own merits and are useful in different situations. I hope that this video was helpful for those of you who are trying to decide on what color change method to use when creating stripes. Let me know what your favorite method for creating stripes are in the comments below. And thanks so much for watching my video. I hope to see you in the next one.